of times that the stack is wrong is relatively small in comparison to the number of devices scanned. It's a very small incremental improvement. That said, it's an interesting problem set, and the problem set of relying on a set of data that can be so easily mangled is by itself a reason to explore it. It's why you'd explore that problem, but people are going to be bored to tears by talking about it because the problem set is so small that most people just don't even notice it. Most people wouldn't even know that happens.
Well, most people that I've talked to about it have been rather interested.
That's one problem. What happens when you're at security competitions and you're lying like crazy to the guy scanning you?
Yeah.
There's very few situations I could see it where
well,
it's been that useful.
it's like we had a really cool tool.
NAT configurations?
NAT doesn't always affect it. It doesn't affect it often enough to matter.
Really?
Yeah, really. Go into a large corporate environment and nmap 50,000 hosts, and the number of times you will find a mistake from normal stack is like that. So tiny as to be inconsequential within the overall result set. Not statistically significant, so to speak.
What happens when they're in the network? What happens when they're in your network too? NAT doesn't do anything at that point.
Yeah, but you do have to get a foothold on the network at some point.
There's always a hole.
Yeah, but
the Mac.
if that hole requires you to know the operating system, or at least have a good idea what the operating system is.
I don't know, I'm just saying.
I have to derail this conversation, but
No,
go to a
derail.
broader point that you brought up. What do you do when what you're passionate about and interested in doesn't really have much real-world applicability or
It will.
isn't interesting to many other people?
It will be.
I think that you have to balance two things, right? I mean, I think that, we all live in a real world, so we all have real bills and, we all have real responsibility. So, I think that it's probably the best way I can equate something like this. And it's, my wife, she's a playwright. And, she's not a Broadway playwright. She's very well educated. She's done some festivals and some things like that, but she couldn't make a living on playwriting and stuff like that. So when I met her, she was working at a, she spent 40, 50 hours a week playwriting, but she had a 40, 50 hour a week job working at a musical theater licensing company and stuff like that. So she can be kind of immersed in that industry. And so she followed her passion at night, and hopefully one day her work will be relevant, and maybe one day there'll be a big premiere and stuff like that. But I use that as not knowing your personal interests and things like that, but like one day maybe her work will be relevant, and I think that I give her a lot of credit for always for not losing her passion towards her work, because she believes in herself and that one day it's going to be there. So the best thing I can tell you is that you have to figure out a way to A, pay the bills, and then B, your work will become relevant. It will become something where there might not be a big broad market. I don't know what it is, but it might not be a big broad market.
I'm not even fully sure what it is.
And that's fine. I mean, but if you stay to something that you feel really good about and you pour your whole effort into it, I mean, chances are that someday down the road, it's going to, regardless of what it means to everybody else, you'll have that own personal satisfaction that it meant something to you and you did it really well. Does that make sense, or am I off?
Yeah, so I understand what you say in 140 characters or less. Do what you love and everything else will fall into place.
Well, and actually, I think Lee's a little more pragmatic than that, but that's what I would say in 140 characters or less. You would say, do what you love and make sure you pay the bills at the same time.
I'm very much a realist.
Yes, he is, but I think in this industry, and I think the playwright example isn't as relevant in this industry. His paper is boring to 95% of the people at this conference. I wish he was still here so I could talk to him about it. But
he'll be back.
I mean, his paper.
He's going to cry right now.
Yes, exactly. His paper is not something that everyone in this industry is going to be interested in. But if you put him in a room of the 7 vulnerability engineers at Encircle, it's a 5-day-long fascinating conversation. Part of doing what you love is finding an audience of people who also do what you love. Him talking to the guys at a big insurance company or a financial services company, they're going to glaze over in 30 seconds, and they're not going to offer him a job for it. Encircle might.
And he would probably kill himself if
Yes,
he
he
worked
probably,
there.
and vice versa, right? So the thing is, I especially in this industry, there are I can think of one really interesting, dude, I've been talking about you the whole time you were out of the room. I can think of one I'm not. I can think of one paper I've ever seen that couldn't have led someone to a job, and that was a Frederick Diggle advisory on VulnDev about vulnerabilities in Notepad. You want to look that up?
No, we know.
Yes, you know what I'm talking. You know what I'm talking about. The thing is, you can have the most obscure interest in this industry. Whether it's operating system detection or vulnerabilities in VMS or whatever. I mean, the nice thing about this industry is most of the stuff becomes relevant eventually. I mean, the people that like 5 or 6 years ago were exploring vulnerabilities in JavaScript and cross-site scripting stuff, suddenly became relevant in 2005, and now it's the big part of the industry. The things that have yet to be explored in this industry are usually the most profitable ones. If you're doing what everybody else is doing, you're probably not.
You're late.
Yeah, you're late. So this is a
What time did the party start?
Yeah, this is a particularly interesting industry in that it's not. There's very few playwrights in this industry. There's very few things that you're going to be completely. By the time you get it good enough to be almost done, you're going to be relevant. Is really what I'm trying to say. I started talking about the social engineering stuff. When did we meet? That was my first talk on social engineering.
Yeah,
2000.
because wasn't this Hope, it was the Hope before.
Yeah, so it's 2004. Hope
Close to 4.
or 2006. Hope 2K6. That was what it was. I started talking about it then. Only now is there a market for it. But I've had 3 years of prep. I've got hundreds of PowerPoint slides. I've got hundreds of distinctions that no one else does because it's what I've been working on for 3 years. Didn't make me a damn bit of money then. We've already got multiple signups for our first training class at ChicagoCon because people are starting to see that social engineering is now the big deal. And people are starting.
Why is that?
Because we're solving most of the other problems.
It's harder now to attack the computers. Back in the day, it
Yeah.
was easy to get a remote root on some box when NetBIOS is open to the world.
It's way easier for me to talk someone out of their password than to steal it from their computer. Simpler. So.
If you steal it from the computer, it's probably in a hash, and you have to crack that.
Yeah, there's just.
Isn't that a little touch of irony?
Well, it's cyclical. And in the webinar we did on Tuesday, we talked about the cycle. We've spent the last 10 years focusing all of our energy and all of our effort on securing the computers. We ignored the people. So the people are the target. We're going to spend the next 5 years focusing on teaching our people not to do stupid things, and by then the computers will all be vulnerable again.
I would also argue in the landscape of attack vectors, social engineering is one that's used to perpetrate a targeted attack versus the technical method is one that's able to implement a widespread or mass market.
Agreed and disagree because you're starting to see mass social engineering attacks on Facebook and through large email.
I suppose I think of social engineering more along the lines of a personal thought. But yeah, okay,
Yeah, when you start incorporating technology in it.
It's a technical measure. It's a technical measure. If it's social engineering or not.
Yeah.
I really feel like antivirus 2009 is the trendy kid of malware. Like, whatever is popular, it's got it. What can anyone think of like a malware tactic that's been used in recent years that WinAntivirus has not at some point incorporated? Like, I actually just got WinAntivirus 2009 on one of my computers because I happened to be using an old version of Firefox. I was pitched to root out too. It was terrible getting rid of that.
We're not doing the social engineering talk, so.
Oh.
You want to switch slides? I'll do
you want
that
to?
one.
No, you want to go through the presentation?
Let's do this one.
Okay, good.
I think by now everybody already knows who we are, right? We probably don't need this slide up here. In case people don't know, wow, can you all see that at all?
It says the downturn.
It says the downturn. It says we're in a crappy economy. In case anyone hasn't seen the news in the last few years. I've seen estimates that unemployment will reach 15% by the end of the year. That's big. That's significant. We haven't had 15% unemployment since the Depression.
Let's even say that unemployment got up to a lot of more conservative estimates are somewhere between 9.5% and 10% employment, and that doesn't even factor into people who have quote unquote given up on the job market and stuff like that. I mean, people just checking out. Do you guys realize the magnitude of that? I mean, do you realize just like the magnitude? I mean, of the scope of having 1 out of every 10 people who are able and willing to work not have a job. I mean, the thought of you see, I see it a little bit in my peer group because I'm not all security. I see it in my office every day, but I mean, my peer group. I live in a town that's about an hour from Manhattan. A lot of the people who live in that town and live in my neighbors are they're not Wall Street executives. They're not those $100 million bonus people. They're IT or operations or accounting. They're people who in New Jersey on a good year. On a bad year, they might make $120,000, $130,000 a year. On a bad year, on a great year, they might make $150,000 to $175,000. Which their 2 children, the SUV in the driveway. I've moved out to suburbia, right? So, but you have all these people, and you think about 1 out of every 10 of those people not being able to pay their mortgage, because a lot happens is that people are getting very nervous because it's not a scenario. Those are the people at the highest risk too, because like a lot of these folks, they've lost a lot of their quote unquote ability to function as individual contributors. They've lost their marketability has gone past where they are. So in other words, their compensation has kind of surpassed their skill set. And the fact is that those are the people that are getting eliminated.
Yeah, it's scary. You just reminded me of it when you were talking about your peer group. I notice it. I work for myself, obviously, and work remotely from everybody that is around me. And because of my incredible inability to focus for longer than 5 minutes, I have to work outside my house. I can't sit at home or I'll do the dishes or something. So I always work at Starbucks. If you want to find me, I'm in a Starbucks somewhere. And usually when I'm at home, I'm in the same Starbucks, which is right next to my house.
How convenient.
It's very convenient. It's actually in my apartment complex. Really kind of cool. Every time I go home from one of these trips, there are more people in the Starbucks. I doubt this time when I get home, and I haven't really been working there for a couple of weeks now. I doubt that I will get a table this time. Like it's now to the point that you have to fight for tables because people who were normally going to work every day are now job searching out of Starbucks. Good for Starbucks. Not so good for the economy as a whole. But it's funny because you're talking about that all those people who are getting eliminated. I think there are still people who are surviving, and usually it's the people who do still have those skills and are able to still do the technical stuff, but also the people who show high growth. The people that get eliminated the quickest. Trip over the extension cord there. That might have been ugly.
You're going to own the Source conference next year.
Yeah, exactly. Or the hotel, one or the other.
True. Or both.
The people who are getting eliminated quickest are the people who are coasting, the people who have stopped growing, who have stopped learning, who are just sort of sitting there. The people who have we were talking about earlier, who have given what did you say? Here's your revolver, sir.
Yeah, I mean,
the people who have really stopped trying are the people who are getting eliminated quickest. And what's really unfortunate about it is that we as humans have the tendency to, nobody can see my slides. Awesome. We as humans have the tendency to not prepare for things. You know, oh, it's not going to happen to me. We're all in this massive denial. Like, I'm not going to be the one that's going to get eliminated and have to worry about how to pay my mortgage. It won't be me. But
And that's very true, is that, you know, people always believe it's always happening to the other guy. You know, it's happening to the other person. You know, I'm an information security professional. Our industry is the hottest industry in the world. There are not enough people to do the jobs. Everybody needs information security people. You know what? When companies are laying 10% of their workforce off, when 15%, when a company cuts 20,000 people and it's 15% of their workforce, I guarantee you that if they have 10 information security people, that anywhere between 1 and 3 of those people are losing their jobs.
yeah.
If not more.
Yeah, in some cases more, because there's lots of consulting companies out there that can take some of that load. You know, it's good for us who are in consulting. I mean, we have the opportunity to take on some of that load from companies, and there are still some consulting companies hiring for that very reason. But unfortunately, all those people in that job probably didn't think it was going to be them. You know, and they weren't prepared.
And they're probably very surprised when it did happen.
Yeah, no kidding. You know, locking the barn door after the horse is stolen it's a little late, because you can really, unfortunately, you can prepare for it. You know, or fortunately, you can prepare for it. And even if it doesn't affect you, you can push it out as long as possible. I mean, the goal. I like to use the hurricane metaphor. I mean, the goal is not necessarily to keep the hurricane from blowing your house down. It's to make sure that it doesn't get all your stuff too. You know, it's to make sure that you have managed to protect your assets, that you've done everything that you can to shore up the foundation, and that you are able to put yourself in a situation that even if it hits you, you survive it and you come out as little damaged as possible. We said that there's basically 5 steps. You can slice and dice these however you see fit, but I don't think there's any question that we think that planning is the first step.
I mean, it's you know, there was, Mike said something about it was something about coincidence, or but I like this one. You know, Branch Rickey. You know, luck is the residue of opportunity and design. You know, and the truth of the matter is that when things come together, you know, they always seem to come together for a reason. You know, it's there's no accident why people, you know, put themselves at the right place at the right time. You know, some of it is happenstance, but you know, a lot of it is because, you know, someone's open to opportunity, and when opportunity knocks, you know, they're able to answer that call. So, you know, when we talked about it in the first hour, you know, you're talking about, you know, understanding what your career plan might be, and really trying to think about, you know, the direction that, you know, you want to head into, and planning accordingly. You know, you have to think about, you know, where's the skill set matrix that you want to develop, and then how to figure out, you know, how do I incorporate the things that I'm doing both, you know, professionally and personally into that plan per se.
I think you know, the key to a good plan is to have it be both reasonable in the short term and long term. I see people planning and they write like a task list of things to do for the next 30 days. That's not a plan. That's a task list. You know, if your plan doesn't go out at least a year or 2, it's not a plan. Because it's really hard, and I said it earlier about my own life, it's really hard to keep yourself focused in the chaos if you don't know what your end goal is. If I just know that I want to take 3 steps, that's fine, but I could be walking 3 steps in the wrong direction. You know, Tony Robbins always says something about you don't get, it's like saying that your goal is to see a sunset and running east. You know, it's like if you don't tie the short term to the long term, you're never going to get there. It's just a task list. But also, and we'll talk more about this later, but the worst thing that we see a whole lot is people who have a career plan that doesn't take into account their whole lives. Especially when you have a career crisis. if you don't know who you want to be, and in more than just your life, in your relationships and your friendships and your family, when you lose your job, you lose your whole plan. And I'll tell you, there's nothing more life-destroying than losing your whole plan, than having no reason to live, than having no defined idea of where you're going and what you're going to do. So it's important that a plan has more than just, what you want to do on a day-to-day basis.
I mean, people talk about planning, right? I mean, there's an expression that, we plan, God laughs, right? That's the expression. I don't know if everybody ever heard that before, but, I mean, there's always like, a method, a method to the madness. In this discussion, beforehand, since everybody was here, people talk about like following their passion and following their, their goals and their dreams and stuff like that, and doing things that really interested or things that they're passionate about. I mean, I think that when you start incorporating, whatever plan that you make, you have to incorporate those passions. You incorporate your life passions into that work. You understand that, the things that are going to be important for you as you navigate toward those goals. The world that we live in, if you're in that monster.com driven world where, I get calls all the time, can you send me the job description? You know what? It's the worst thing that people can really think about it, because really the best job descriptions are the ones that you kind of create on your own. Because like you should be developing your job description once you get there day one. You shouldn't worry about what you're called or who you report to or how things go in that environment. You should be worrying about, is it possible for me to make the most of this opportunity? Am I going to have an opportunity to succeed? Are people going to be able to, let me kind of push my ideas and explore what I want to do? And is it going to be a framework of an environment that I'm going to feel comfortable showing up 55, 60 hours a week in doing this work? So you should very much be not so much worried about, what somebody else thinks the job to be. What you should be thinking about is that, what do you want your job to become? How, and is it possible for you to take this job or this opportunity and mold it in a way where it benefits your long-term plan? And if you can, then I think it's a good thing to be able to think about and look at. And I think it's one of the criteria when you start evaluating opportunity about, where you might want to be, where you might want to get to. Does this fit in does this help elevate you to that area?
And that's where having mentors is really helpful, because one of the things you can ask yourself or people around you is, who else has done this? Who else has taken a job like this and made it successful in this way? Who else can I follow? It's always easier to follow someone else's footsteps and avoid the mistakes they made than to make the mistakes yourself.
So like, I'll give you an example. Like if you were an accountant, get the revolver again. But if you were an accountant, right, and you wanted to be a CFO, there is a very structured career plan to become a chief financial officer at a big company, a small company, because the accounting profession's been around for a long time. I love to pick on accountants, right? If you asked 100 chief information security officers or information security leaders at whether it's software companies or corporations, if you asked them how they got there, they would probably give you, I would probably venture somewhere between 75 and 90 different career paths to get there. Now, one of the things that you might want to think about is that, how do you look at the ones that have developed that career path and have achieved some sort of level of success that you emulate or that you might aspire to achieve one day? You might think about, well, what did they do? What were some of the steps along their way? Or maybe pick 2 or 3 of them and figure out some of the things that they did. Maybe as early as education, maybe as early as conferences, maybe anything about the types of organizations that they've worked in, how they rounded out their experiences. So try to, there's enough of a data sampling after 10 to 15 years of this industry really being relevant that you can actually some of those examples do exist. So I think it's important when you look at that, you know, you start selecting people that you might want to kind of mold yourself after, and find ways to approach them, find ways to be in the same room as those people, and, you know, hopefully some of them are approachable, and hopefully some of them will get, you know, to get you to, you know, help guide you to where you might want to be.
The one thing I'll say about planning, sort of a bit of a digression, but it's important to know, every plan has risk, right? Every plan cuts off something, you know. Like Lee was telling his story earlier about working for the Dodgers and then becoming an information security recruiter. He couldn't be both an information security recruiter and the GM of the LA Dodgers. You can be one or the other. You know, you can be a CISO or you can be a pastry chef. You probably can't be both, you know. So every plan that you create is going to eliminate a whole lot of options in your life. That means sacrifice. I can run my own thing and I can run my own business, but it means a lot less sleep and a lot less time playing Xbox. Is that worth it? To me, yeah. Is that worth it to some people? Not so much. The whole thing is you have to, when doing a plan, take into account what you're giving up. You know, if you want to be a high-end consultant and consult around the world, that doesn't work so well if you want to stay home 300 days a year. You only get one choice. You can do one or the other.
You can't be sort of pregnant.
Yeah, very much so.
I mean,
You know,
it's one of those things where, you know, when people start thinking about their career choices, right? I mean, there's a certain level of sacrifice in everything. And as you progress throughout your life, you have different levels of things that you're willing to give up. When I was 23 and 24 years old, if you wanted me to get on a plane and go anywhere, I'm in. Now, it's a little bit different. You know, I have more responsibility. I have a young child at home. You know, it's, you know, a lot of cases that, you know, for me, before my son was born, I would work till 8 o'clock, you know, in my office no matter what. Now I kind of be like, you know, maybe it's not that important. I mean, those are different things that I personally have gone through, but, you know, they're different things. You know, I've probably adjusted the scope of what I envision my business to become, and kind of like how my business operates and the mechanics of that, as I've grown and as I've, you know, had more experiences. I mean, that's part of my own plan. You know, I mean, there's so many different things that happen, but, you know, there's nothing wrong with adjusting your plan. Your plan should be adjusted, right? You should always revisit that plan, because what happens is this: is that, you know, it's like a breathing organism. You know, it should be dynamic. You know, you should be able to mold it and shape it and go back, and, you know, you might veer off in the direction, you might come back. You know, you can go a lot of different ways, but understand that you should never lose sight of those long-term focus, but recognize the fact that for everything that you're trying to get out of something, there is normally some sacrifice, and then you have to weigh the fact, is the sacrifice worth the reward? And sometimes you sacrifice and the reward doesn't materialize.
and you have to be willing to make the leap anyway.
And that's risk.
That is risk.
That is risk.
There is always going to be risk. And so enough talking. Let's have them do an exercise. You didn't know this was going to be interactive, but this is not just for us to talk about, because this isn't about us. You know, we can talk at you for an hour, but you guys doing a plan is far better than us talking. So take all the pieces of paper or your laptop or whatever. Take 5 minutes. Answer these questions. The point is to get an idea of the current state of your life and where you think about yourself going.
I'm going to do it too. It's getting beamed up.
It's probably your cell phone. You're right next to the thing. Give it about another minute.
Pencils down. I'm checking.
All right, so as you read that over, positive or negative? Happy with where you're going? Generally? That's a good way to get yourself in the mindset of examining where you are and where you're going. The next step from there is goal setting, both short-term and long-term. I generally like to have this set of plans for my life. That's me. I'm a bit of a planner. Mike's got this look on his face like, are you serious?
Anything more than 2 to 5 years out, it's all.
And thank you. That's the perfect segue to what I was about to say. Dude, serious. Thank you. You should be my like cue cards or something. Anything more than 2 to 5 years is less about what I want to do than who I want to be. Who do I want to be when I'm 60 years old, for example? What kind of life experiences do I want to have had? What kind of things do I want to have done? What kind of impact do I want to have had on the world? You know, whether it's as a parent, whether it's as the people around me. It's sort of the same exercise as you see it in some of the cheesier old self-help stuff. Like, what do you want it to say on your tombstone? Who do you want to have been 30 years from now?
Bernie
15 years
Madoff.
from now? Bernie Madoff. Yes.
I wouldn't turn it down.
Yeah, it's like one of those. One of the,
Gotta know when to leave the country.
right, exactly. He stayed in the country just a couple days too long there. But to me, these are the actual actionable plans. These are the, you know, anything from sort of 1 to 2 years. Those are the things you're going to make decisions on a daily basis. But are you being consistent with who you want to be 50 years from now, 30 years from now, 20 years from now? I don't plan past sort of the age of 60. For those who don't know, I'm 32. So I sort of set that longest term at 60. I can't imagine who I'm going to be as a senior citizen. I can't imagine what that phase of my life will look like.
60 is the new 40. Though.
60 is the new 40, yeah. But I can imagine
Ask
how
my
I
aunt.
want to be transitioning from that point. I can't imagine who I will want to be at that jumping off point. You know, you may have a different plan. I put this list to someone who was in her mid-50s, and she wrote back and told me that she couldn't imagine what life at 85 would be. You know, and you guys, being sort of 10 years younger than me, might have a hard time imagining what 60 looks like. So you have to find the list for yourself. You have to find the set that you can create a vision for. But at the same time, having that vision for who you want to be at that point gives you an anchor for all the decisions you make in the next 2 to 5 years, right? If they're completely inconsistent, you have a problem. If you say at 30 I want to run a Bernie Madoff like head or Ponzi scheme Or sorry, at 30, I want to be a wonderful person, but you're setting up your Ponzi scheme, right? Yeah.
Year 1, plan Ponzi scheme. Years 1 through 29, bilk investors out of money.
Exactly.
Year 30, leave to Antigua. Call Stanford up and make plans.
The thing is, it has to be consistent, and the longer term plans will give you an idea of how you can peg your current activities to who you ultimately want to be. That said, at the same time, we want you to prepare for contingencies. And I'm not going to have you stop and do this exercise, but grab the slides off of my website afterwards. One of the things that I think is really important when you're talking about bad economic times is to know what situation you'd be in if you went without income now. What is your runway? I mean, ultimately, if you lost your job today, how long could you manage to continue to pay the rent and keep food on the table? Most Americans, the answer is none. You know, most Americans, I think this, what was the savings? You would know this, the savings rate for the last 2 years.
Well, it's funny, the savings rate in America was actually, it was a negative savings rate for, this last quarter, savings rate actually went up to a positive direction, and that's just basically a result from the fear. I don't have the, the numbers, it's like, in decimal points and stuff like that, but, I mean, that's a big, a big scenario. Why people are saving now, it's the people who still do have jobs are saving because they're saying, well, if it happened to Joe down the street or if it happened to Mary, it can happen to me. So you have that type of, so you have that type of scenario, like when you look at it, right? Like, so you think about, you use the term like runway, right? That's a VC term, right? That's how venture capitalists talk about their portfolio companies, or they talk about burn rate and that type of stuff. You got to figure out, look at your enterprise of you Inc. as, you're your venture capitalist. That's your startup. That's your funding, and then. How am I going to raise capital? I mean, that's really kind of a way I'm going to do it, and where are my marketable skills that are going to be able to get me to raise capital? But, you start thinking about, like, this is much different when you're 20 years old versus when you're 30 years old versus when you're 40 years old versus when you're 50 years old. So, this exercise, if you look at this, I mean, most people, if you listen to Susie Orman, who I like actually, I think she's very good. She said that most people should have 6 months worth of savings. Now, if you told me when I was 23 years old that I have 6 months worth of savings, all I really would need would be $400 on somebody's couch, and that would have been enough for me, right? But you tell me now that I need 6 months worth of savings, I got more responsibilities, so I got to think more about that. So you have to think about like what that really means to you, and then you also think about how easy it is to replace that. Now, tying this all in, we're talking about money because I think money is really important for people to think about. It's one of these things where the more responsible you are in your financial life, the better decisions you can make for your career, because you wind up able to take jobs because you want to take them, not because you have to take them. So you should think about that. I know that, things are expensive and stuff like that, but all those little months of personal sacrifice, do I go out to dinner how many times a week? Or, go out with your friends, the bar bill's $100, you're like, hey, no problem, whatever, I'm making good money now. That stuff comes back to hurt you. I bet there are a lot of people right now that if they could take back, some of the quote unquote good times and experiences that they had, and they look at, the world staring them at their face and say, you know what? Maybe, I had a good time, but, that time's over. I'm not saying, don't enjoy your life. I'm saying is that there are consequences for those actions, and that your career is one of those casualties because you put yourself in a situation where you become vulnerable. And so that's why, I think it's important if you can start thinking about it now, that you think about, well, how do you plan for the what if? Because the what if looks a lot different if you don't have to worry about how am I going to keep the lights on.
Yeah, no question. And I encourage everybody to do that exercise, but we're not going to stop and do it right at this moment. It's worth doing. Step 2 is to really take the time to work on your career and not in it. This is a sort of rip off of something that Michael Gerber said in his book, The E-Myth. He talked about entrepreneurs fail because they spend all their time working in their business and not on it. They spend, for example, me, I spend all my time pen testing and not enough time dealing with my accountant because I'm good at pen testing. And it's natural for me to do a pen test. It's natural for me to work on that stuff. And me talking to an accountant is like a fish trying to talk to an elephant. It doesn't make...
I don't speak elephant.
Yeah, I don't either. And I don't speak accountant. You've seen me with a spreadsheet.
Yeah, they're not good.
Me with a spreadsheet is not good. This lesson really applies to your career, though. Most people are not good at working on their career, at spending the time planning, at spending the time figuring out what their strengths and weaknesses are, finding coaches, working on figuring out what training you need. I had a great employee at one point who blew my mind and really showed me the benefit of this. We were preparing for his annual review, and he sent me his training plan for the year. Unsolicited. I hadn't asked anybody for a training plan. He sent me a training plan, and I thought I was going to find, like, take class, or like one line. 50 objectives for his own learning for that year, 52, one a week, in an Excel spreadsheet with like tracking and the whole thing. Blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. But that's a guy who, since I hired him, has gone on to create, basically, he's got his own company that he's running on the side. He's had 2 really awesome vulnerability research jobs that he could have probably told me he was going to take those jobs off that plan, because all of the plan was organized towards preparing himself for those 2 jobs. Not many of us do that. Not many of us have an idea about what our career needs to look like and have a plan for the future. So what I find as a really good way to start is to do a gap analysis, to write your own job description, not just the things that you do on a daily basis, but all the skills that you really need to be successful in what you currently do. And then figure out which things you're missing. What things, if you had them, would you be better at your job if you had those skills right now? And basically perform a gap assessment like you would for an organization doing an information security program on your own career and your own skills. I have always used the portfolio model for human capital as the background of any of these assessments that I do. This portfolio model it's funny, it was something I took from a Harvard Business Review article when they were talking about assessing human resources strength. And it was HBR in 2006, May 2006 to be precise. And basically they said that there were 5 different types of skills, and I actually added the last one because I like the idea of talking about what weirdness you bring to something. But there's your technical skill, which as an accountant is math and knowing the laws and all that kind of stuff, and as a security person is obviously real technical skill. I put it in quotes because when I'm talking to security people, we think technical skills means you're a CISSP. That's not technical, but you know what I'm talking about. And actually, a CISSP is technical for a security manager. Those are the technical skills of a security manager's job. There's also your strategic skill, which is your ability to see the industry as a whole. There is your industry knowledge, which is your knowledge of what's actually going on. When I say strategic skill, I mean more about directing yourself within the industry, understanding how what you do technically fits into what the market needs, and just knocked my own microphone off, and what the market has going on, what it'll be in the future. For example, you could call it strategic to say that I knew a couple of years ago that social engineering would be interesting,
Or I was
coming up
lucky.
in the future. Or I was lucky, but I actually did it as a plan. Relationship skills. How are you at building a network, at maintaining that, and has said to me at different times that the best job that you can have is the one you currently have. And it's entirely because of this. You have built a portfolio of knowledge and a portfolio of effectively capital through the political relationships you have in your organization and through your knowledge of their processes. This is a skill that you have that when you move to a new organization, this gets reset to zero almost in every case. So whereas you might have all of this to be successful in your job, if you need that to be successful in your job, starting in a new company could be very difficult.
Yeah, that's a huge mistake that people make, is that, you know, the value that, you know, the value that they've assessed to their skill or where they've moved up in the organization is because they know how to get things done. Like everybody sees Shawshank Redemption, you know. So Red, you know, the guy in the prison, Morgan Freeman says, you know, I'm the guy around here who can get things. You know, on the outside, everybody can get things. He's not really that valuable guy. But in that prison, he's a guy who can get things. So you have to think about, like, you know, when you work in a company, and normally this happens in larger, bigger, multinational companies, if your value is the fact that you can get, you know, Sally in accounting and Bill in HR and, you know, this one in commercial markets to all kind of embrace the security program and stuff like that, because your kids play, you know, Little League with Sally's kids and you go golfing with Bill and you play poker with John. If that's the case, that's fine. But if the reason that you're good at getting their buy-in is because you're an excellent presenter, you make compelling arguments and those types of things, you know, that person has some real other skills. The person who's, you know, that internal capital that goes out the window, you know, that goes out the window when you start. So people, they overplay their hand in that way. They overplay their value because they don't they fail to realize that their value has become one that is within the walls of their environment is big, but outside their environment is very minimal. So, and I think in a lot of times that those people are the ones that really have a very difficult time, you know, in actually adapting when change happens. The company gets bought, somebody acquired, they promote somebody over the person and stuff like that, and then the person winds up kind of lost. So you have to think about that, because it just shows that the other skills are skills that you can control and are valuable on the outside, but that company-specific knowledge is really, truly only valuable as long as you stay. And I've seen a lot of times when people, they say, oh, I want to leave and go somewhere. They go somewhere, and then they realize, like, wait, I want to go back. I want my old job back. And by that time, it's too late, you know? So it's one of those things where, you know, you have to really think about that, you know, and you have to really work on the skills. You know, when you're doing these things, you start thinking about two types of marketability. It was on a slide before, but your internal marketability, and it was one of the questions that you asked, is your internal marketability and your external marketability. Your internal marketability is always about politics and who do you get along with and how people think of you and your brand of, you know, are you the person who comes to meetings on time? Are you the person who always gets things done? Are you the person that comes up with great ideas? Are you the person who really follows through? Your external brand is, hey, if I didn't work here, what would people really think of me? If the company, if we got Lehmaned the next day, where would I go and who would hire me? And I think that's kind of how you think about it.
Also playing into that same sort of brand is your weirdness quotient. We were talking about a friend of ours today, and Lee, we were talking about a potential opportunity that he could take, and Lee said to me, yeah, but that company is, what was it? That company, they all looked like they just stepped out of a Brooks Brothers catalog. And our friend, you said, I believe you said, he's totally a farm guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's a rural guy.
Yeah, he is. It was the perfect description. That's what Weirdness Quotient is about. I mean, I know that if I'm in an organization that requires me to wear a suit every day, I'm not going to survive. I also know people who, if they were in an organization that let them wear T-shirts all the time, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves, right? So,
but wait, I want to interrupt you really quick. So let me pose this question for you. So, and it's a good topic, right? Like, you know, well, what happens if they made me wear a suit and tie every day, you know? Well, would you be willing to sacrifice the suit and tie every day if it enabled you to achieve 50 or 5 or 6 things that helped you get to your long-term career goal?
And that's always the sacrificial question, right? It's funny because I want
Go
to.
ahead, I'm
We should
sorry.
answer that. No, we should answer that question, but I think it's a personal question. But I sort of have a tendency to talk about weirdness quotient in terms of, very much in terms of appearance, because it's easy to see weirdness quotient. It's not so easy to see weirdness quotient in terms of action, but that's actually probably much more impactful. I can put on a suit. I can never not be me. I can never not be the guy that always asks questions in a meeting. I can never not be the person who asks particularly annoying questions most of the time. I'm never going to be micromanageable. If you micromanage me, bad things happen on both sides.
When animals attack.
Yes, very much so. It's like an Animal Planet episode. Those are all part of my uniqueness. They're part of who I am and how I'm different. In some organizations, that is appreciated, loved, and rewarded
Embraced.
well. In some organizations, they would want to throw me out the 4th floor window.
The Brooks Brothers people.
Yes, the Brooks Brothers people would hate me. Knowing this about yourself is in my view, is one of the fundamental skills for understanding your ability to be successful anywhere. While everyone spends all their time career planning around this, and a couple of people spend some time talking about these two, and you read the touchy-feely networking people that talk about this one, you almost never hear about these two. And to me, most of your success is in these two. It's in figuring out what you know about the company that allows you to get things done, and in who you are and why that's acceptable where you are. Those things are going to be probably the most difficult to assess, but the most valuable ones to have a valid assessment of.
Yeah, no, I mean, here's a question, and people, this is a great question, and since we're kind of a young group, I feel very comfortable talking about it. So older people are very, they're very nervous about putting all the years of experience that they have on their resume. They're very nervous about that. And I always say, the response I always say to somebody, I said, let me ask you a question. You take off the last 15 years of your resume, it looks like you've only worked for 12 or 13. When you walk into the interview, are you going to go down to, drink a magic potion and turn into a 30-year-old when you walk into the office? I said, so if they don't want to hire you because you're 55 years old, I said, wouldn't you rather know that before you schlep down to the interview and take the interview and stuff like that? If they don't like old people, would I want to work there? If they don't like people who are brown, who are blue, who are Jewish, who are Catholic, if they don't like you for who you are, don't hide that when you interview. Be yourself, because you'd rather find that out up front than find it out after you've been there for a month or so. There's no, you have to understand that once you wind up in that job, you are in that job. And then leaving that job becomes hard too. Well, why were you only there for a month? What's wrong with your decision-making process? Didn't you know enough? People start questioning your judgment, And that's a hard thing to deal with. And you can't say, yeah, well, I didn't want to work there because I found out they didn't like old people. Well, wait 1 second. Wait 1 second. We have somebody here that doesn't like it. This is an HR suit waiting to happen. There are all those types of things. So be yourself. If you wear your hair long and you're unwilling to cut it and stuff like that, yeah, you might make it neat. But if you have an environment that everybody has to, that goes to the buzz cut guy every week, you don't want to be there. Business culture is a lot more lax now than it used to be. If you date back 10 years, there were a lot more suits and ties and stuff like that. Even the general business culture is a little bit more relaxed now. But you have to think about it. You have to think about, is my uniqueness going to be embraced in this environment, or is it going to be repelled? Because there's always going to be somebody that says, oh yeah, that's the one with the tattoo of the spider on your neck, That would creep me out. I'd have a hard time hiring. If somebody had if I had somebody come to the interview with a turtleneck and the first day that I hired, there was a freaking black widow on their neck, that would freak me out. I had to say, look, we probably have to reevaluate this. I might be old-fashioned. But the idea of, I mean, like, but I would know, you know, if somebody didn't like that about me, I'd rather know that. I'd rather know. I'd always would rather know. I would rather not dress it up. It's very easy to, you know, it's very, you can fake something for a 3-hour interview. You can't fake something 40 hours. You want to pay to yourself. You know, you don't want to put yourself in those situations. So, you know, understand, you know thyself. I mean, it's really important.
And beyond appearance, it comes out eventually.
Mm-hmm. Always will.
Especially in times of stress. I could probably fake being like, you know, nice and calm and demure and just shut my mouth and go along for a certain amount of time. But I'll tell you, when it's, you know, 2 a.m. and you've been at work for too long, that's when the real personality is going to come out. And you are eventually going to have that moment where if they, you know, my worst case scenario is that I enter a command and control environment where you don't speak unless spoken to. You know, if you're the lowest man on the totem pole, you don't open your mouth. I once had a boss tell me that when I was older, I could have an opinion, but not until then. And actually said this in front of many coworkers. This was not like a secret at that organization. Until you had been there for 5 or 6 years, if you didn't have, you know, until you'd been there for 5 or 6 years, your job was to be quiet and speak only when asked for answers. Anybody who knows me, and you guys have been laughing through this whole conversation because you worked with me, anybody who knows me knows that that's not an environment I should be in. Because I can only fake that for so long before I go off on the guy. Strengths and weaknesses. We talk about this all the time, but most people spend a lot of time worrying about what they're weak on. And that's really boring and frustrating. If I had to spend 80% of my time trying to improve my accounting skill, my business would suffer immensely, and I would suffer immensely. What you should spend your time working on is 80% of the time on your strengths, and 20% of your time on the weaknesses that matter. You know, when you do a gap analysis and you look at what skills do I actually need to be successful? Do I need to be an accountant to be successful in my business? Absolutely not. Do I need to know enough about accounting so that I can talk to an accountant about my business? Absolutely.
And you should think about the skills that are critical for your long-term advancement. You know, you also look at the skills that not only what you think is important, but you also have to consider, you know, I use the term that beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So you almost have to take that other person's perspective and think about what skills are going to be appealing to someone who I might sit in front of one day, and what are those skills that would make me make opportunities available to me. And they might be things, they could be a number of different angles. I mean, they could be things like, you know, like I talked to, we do some recruiting for information security salespeople. Salespeople who are good golfers, golf is actually, believe it or not, it's an important skill in sales. Because, you know, someone says, hey, what's your handicap? And I don't know much about golf except Tiger Woods is pretty good at it. But at the same point in time, you know, that could be an important skill in a sales environment because business is done on the golf course. I don't know. But it's one of those things where you should start, you know, you start thinking about like, well, what are the things that, and think outside. Think about, you know, who might be evaluating you one day and what are those things that would appeal to them? You know, what education, what certification? I mean, all these types of things that would, you know, that would have some value to that person who's ultimately going to have some, you know, some say over your career and your career direction.
Quickly, take about a minute to do this because we're running a little long. Just do this step. What are your 3 best strengths? Write them down. What are the things that make you most successful in your life? Just a hint, it's probably not your knowledge of any one protocol. It's probably a little bigger than that, or programming language or anything like that.
Well, that's mine.
That is yours.
I'm a C++ guy.
You're a guru.
I'm a guru. I'm an expert. I would put that on my resume.
Expert C.
Expert. Expert.
When I think of you, I hope that-
That's what I would think.
Yeah.
I've been trying to build that brand of mine.
That is your
Expert.
personal brand. You know that.
That's good. When you think of Lee, think of C. That's plus. an intimate gathering today.
It is. I like this. We can just be ourselves. We don't actually have to be talking.
Sure.
Once you've got that list, that's the list of things you need to be investing in. How do those things will ultimately relate to probably your longer term plan? Because usually the things that you are best at are the things that you're going to enjoy the most. The things that what they've found is that if you are really competent at something, it's usually more enjoyable to be successful at it than otherwise. I like breaking into things, and I'm good at it. And I'm good at it because I like it, and I like it because I'm good at it. So it's at that point that you invest time and training and effort into all of this kind of learning. We talk about training and certifications a lot in this industry. We talk less about formal education in this industry, but I know you guys have all really invested in formal security education. I have a degree in philosophy, which has nothing to do with the industry. There's also atypical training. You may find that you want to do training that enhances your strengths in different ways.
I think that that's part of it, is that when you start thinking about your skill, right? I mean, where you wind up advancing in different places in your career, it's not so much about those standard skills that kind of what are there, 55,000 CISSPs?
Oh, it's up over 100, isn't it?
It's
getting close to 100.
I don't think CIS. I think that there's like 25,000 SAN certified folks.
Yeah.
God knows how many CISMs. I mean, there are a lot of people that have very good certifications and things like that. But a lot of those things, you start to think about what about your public speaking, or taking a sales class, like just something like spin selling or something like that, or people talk about you guys are all pretty good at it, but social networking aspects of that's a skill of some point in time that corporations are thinking that's a lot more valuable, especially in the recruiting process per se. There's time management might be something that could be very important to people. For me, when I started my business, the one thing that really came hard to me, and it's something that I had to learn and really develop, and I did a lot more versus trial and error, was people management. I had a very difficult time with that, just because my expectations were so high that everybody would be as dedicated as me as the business owner, which was completely a fallacy. But learning that, and then learning how to deal with different people, managing young people is actually a lot more difficult than maybe managing older folks. There's so many different things that you have to think about, but there is some type of training and education for a lot of things, and they also make for interesting talking points. They enable you to stand out. I think that when you start thinking about the investments that you make in your career, and we'll get to that a little bit more, I think it becomes about differentiation. I think that that's the really number one topic that I think is going to become huge in our industry over the next 10 or 15 years, because we're going to become more and more populated. And we become more and more populated by nature, we're going to become more and more average. And because people are going to be more and more average, the more unique things that you have that people can attribute to you, whether they're any of those things or some of the things that I mentioned or some of the things that you build on your own, those things are going to be the differentiators, and they'll be the ones that get you more notice and more recognition and give you the opportunity to present your case to somebody who might be able to put you in a situation where you can accomplish your career goals. So you start thinking about these things, and you start thinking about, well, which one is the right one? And how do you evaluate them? And I will say just very simple. This is my slide, right? So any investment that you make in your career is a good one. It's true. You can't go wrong. People say, well, which certification should I get? Which is the right one? The truth of the matter is, anytime that you're investing in yourself in any way, it's good. Because no matter what, you're going to reap the benefits of it. And when you make these investments, don't invest because of what it might get you. Invest in it because it's something that you truly want. Because it's something that you have an interest in. Like a lot of people say, well, I'm going to get a CISSP because everybody has a CISSP. Well, you know what? You don't have to do that. If you want to, if some jobs one day might require a CISSP, you might want to get that on your own. You might, I mean, those are things, but nothing that you do in investing time and investing in yourself is a bad thing. The second thing is that you get what you pay for. I want you to just play one piece of word association game. If I told you that I had an MBA from Kellogg or Wharton or Tuck or Fuqua, we're good.
Theoretically, yeah.
Or Fuqua or any of the other bigger business schools, or if I told you that I had an MBA from the University of Phoenix, that automatically, you know, the fact that you're in those schools, the fact that you have those types of things automatically makes you more viable. And I'm not saying you have to get an MBA to be a smart person, but I'm just saying that that's a very good way to kind of differentiate those things.
That said, hey, back to rule 1, if all you can do is the University of Phoenix, it's better than nothing.
That's true. But you might also think is that if the University of Phoenix costs you $20,000 a year to attend, you might think of a better way to spend that $20,000.
Absolutely.
So rule number 3, if you don't invest in yourself, don't expect anybody else to. And the reason I say that is very simple, is that you have to take ownership for your own career. You can't say, well, I would have gone to that conference if my boss would have paid for it. Or I would have taken that training, but my company doesn't pay for that anymore. You have to think about things that are, you know, you have to do what you want to do. You know, corporations are going to become less and less vested in your own personal success. And as you see right now, travel budgets are getting slashed, training, everything discretionary is getting slashed. And unfortunately, training falls into discretionary. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of companies think this, is that if I send my best people to training, that makes them more marketable, and that makes it harder for me to retain them. So why would you want to be beholden to a company that would think that way? So you have to take that responsibility on yourself. You should be allocating a certain percentage of your, instead of investing in the stock market or some mutual fund and stuff like that, if you make those investments in your career over the length of time, I would prove that, I would almost stand to prove that even in standard scenarios, that your career will accelerate a lot quicker, your earning potential will be magnified, and you have a better chance of achieving career happiness, which is more important than anything, I believe, than if you would just take that money and sock it away to a 401k plan and stuff like that.
And I think the interest compounds better. Seriously, I think the earlier you start, I mean, you guys have got it. You guys have got it made. I mean, if I had done half as much on security at the age you have, I would be so much better off than I am today. Because much like compound interest, the earlier you start on all of that advancement, the more impact it's going to have when you're 40. You know, when you guys turn 40, you're going to be way ahead of where other people would be who started at 25, 26, even, you know, earlier than that. Just because those first, you know, anybody who's looked at the curve on compound interest, like what is the, you probably know this one, actually Steve, you probably know this one better than anybody. I don't remember the statistic, but like if you invest $5,000 at age 25, or you,
What I used to know, when I was self-employed, as just doing my IRA on my own, 10% interest, a little bit high for now, but you know, that's historical stock market returns since the Great Depression. Your $2,000 IRA limit, which is now $6,000, if you get the, you know, the 50-year one and 5,000 for everybody else, so you know you have more room to go. You start at age 25. By age 65, you have $1 million, and that's just $2,000 a year. But it's because you started at 25.
but the other stat I remember is if you put in That's what it is. If you put in your maximum contribution from age 20 to 25, it ends up worth like $1.5 million. But if you start at 30 and you put in your maximum contribution every year from then to 60, it's still less money than if you did just the 5 years at the beginning.
It's the early money.
And it's that way with career investment too.
Yeah, I
the
mean-
earlier and the more you do it,
And
Yeah.
here's another piece that's important. It's not, and I think you can really kind of tie it into the whole financial models too. It's the consistent investment. It's the fact that the investments have to be made regularly. They can't just be made, well, hey, great, I'm going to do a whole bunch of things between when I'm 20 and 25, and I'll pick this back up again when I'm 40. The fact is that this is part of working on your career. You know, and this is part of the fact that, you know, you have to work on your career. You have to develop your skills because, you know, when you get in a situation when you're competing against 2 or 3 other people for that job that you want, and you say, well, look, well, yeah, I know the other 2 candidates are CISSPs and they've both worked in financial services environments and managed 15 people, but I do have this degree and I've taken these 5 or 6 classes over the course, and I went on my own to get some management training, and you know, I'm a regular public speaker and I'm very comfortable in that environment, and I've taken some sales classes, so I'm very familiar in convincing other folks and getting to where I need to be. That plus all my skill sets would make me different. And what you're looking for when you're in those situations of competition is differentiation, because ultimately we'll all compete, and here we are.
yeah,
So-
great segue.
Yeah, there you go.
It's like we planned that.
Oh my goodness.
You know, the time to brand yourself, of course, is yesterday. Really, not now. But it's impossible to brand yourself and differentiate when you're in the midst of a career crisis. You know, Lee always says it, and I even attributed it to him on the slide. No good decisions made under duress. Like, the day after you lose your job is not the time to think, I'm going to start a blog. You know, maybe it'll help me get a job. It might help you get your next job, but it won't help you get a job right away. Same thing's true about networking. The time that most people network is after they've lost their job. And if anyone's ever been to a networking event, I'll say this, you know, from a dating perspective, being absolutely desperate is the one way to ensure you don't get a date. The same thing works with networking.
Mike knows a lot about
I
desperation.
know all about that one.
I can't speak to that. That's Mike's area.
Yes, yes, you have. I like that.
What did
We might have to steal that one. You have to have the employed glow in order to attract a new employer.
Well, you know what they say. This is they say it on Wall Street a lot, and I'm using a lot of those quotes since I've been reading like more financial stuff nowadays. But the statement or the expression is "as if," and you know, walk into the room as if you own the place, you know, as if you have millions of dollars, as if this, as if that, you know. In other words, that employee, that employer, that air of confidence, the fact that, you know, if you can walk into a place and that, you know, you feel, you know, I always tell these folks that call my office that are a little bit down right now, and I said, look, when you go into the interview, you know what I want you to think about? I want you to think about when you had 6 or 7 recruiters calling you every day and you didn't even want the phone call because you were happy in the job and that there was nothing that they can do to woo you away, but you took the interview anyway just to see what they might offer you. And you walk into that meeting and, you know, you have a little swagger about you, you have a little bit of that air of confidence, there's a bounce in your step, you look sharp, you're that employee glow, you know, you're happy. I mean, those things are important because it's really the truth. I mean, you have to have that type of, you know, people like to, you know, be involved with positive people. It's more comfortable. It's more inviting, right? I mean, so, you know, that's when you talk about networking, right? Always network when you have a position of power. And we talk about networking, and we're not going to get to all our slides in this scenario, but when you talk about networking, the problem is that people decide that I'm going to tap my network before it's too late. When you should be networking you should be networking when you have the ability to actually help other people. You know, your network is only good as if you have to call on it for something that it will respond and help you. If you ever say, well, I'm on LinkedIn and I have 1,000 connections and blah, 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 who cares? But if you have 50 connections and they're all useful, and you could call them up at a drop of a note, and you know you're going to get a response back the next day, and that's all, you know, that's all going to be all well and good. That's meaningful. And especially if there are 50 people who have the ability to kind of A, hire you, B, you know, say, hey, look, you know what? I'm not looking, but I know Joe, who's got a similar company to me. He's looking. He called me up the other day looking for a guy just like you. Let me get Joe on the phone. Joe, I want you to talk to Mike. Mike's looking for a job. I'd hire him right now, but not, boom, you're employed like that. That is real. That is very, very real. I mean, so you have to think about when you're doing good, when you're flying high, when things are good for you, that's when you build your network. And always make sure that when you're networking people, you give back. You should be giving more than you're getting, and that people should say like, wow, that's great, because you should be able to be accessible. Because think about it, just because if you're networking up, somebody underneath you is networking up as well. So you should think about it the same exact way, because you never know when knowing that person who's a little bit junior to you is going to help you out get to where you need to be. So, you know, the world's become a lot small, but thinking about networking from when you're in a position of strength, not when in a position of weakness, because that desperate, you know, the desperate guy at the dance, man, whew, not attractive, not attractive.
Well, and that's most networking events. That's why I talk about networking events.
Oh my
so.
God, you ever go to one of those job fairs? It's
Yeah.
like, it's like a freaking MASH unit. Oh my
Yeah,
God, it's horrible.
it's a whole bunch of, it's like the really bad 40 and over singles bar. I mean, you know.
Bad suits, bad tie, no hair. I mean,
Yeah,
the whole 9 yards.
it's just not happening. And I really believe what's on this slide. I mean, I think ultimately, you know, we talk a lot about branding and, you know, how to get people to know you, but ultimately your network is your brand. The people you know determine who you are. And the people who know you determine who you are. It's all about finding cool people. If you are, it's unfortunately, high school had it right. Life is never much more than like it was in high school. If you hang out with the cool kids, you by definition become one of them. You are by definition cool. And if you hang out with the losers, you are by definition a loser. You know, luckily for probably everyone in this room, the definition of cool and loser gets flipped around a lot after high school ends.
I love those. There's a T-shirt that I see at all the cons.
Really?
That's it's something that reflects that statement, and it's really, I mean, it's really funny that way. I mean, and it's not like, no, I won't fix your computer, but it's like it's really good, and it makes a lot, you know, it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, in high school I was, you know, everybody was much cooler than me, but now we all get to be cool, at least in our own little conference. I don't know if.
But you know what, you know, so I have an expression in my office, right? Like, you know, if you find me one rock star, like here, Lenny just left the room, so I don't have to embarrass him, right? So Ed Scotus is a longtime friend of mine, and so Ed Scotus calls me on the phone probably about it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. He calls me on the phone, and Ed never, I mean, I talk to Ed a lot, but he never recommends anybody. And he calls on the phone, he goes, Lee, I want you to talk to somebody. He's graduating from, I think it's MIT or Harvard, one of those schools. He's getting his master's. He's a really great guy. I want you to help him out. And Ed Scotus calls me up and he says, look, you know, if Ed Scotus calls me up and he tells me he recommends somebody, I guarantee you that person's going, I don't have to check another reference. I don't have to check another thought process. I know that just because I know Ed Scotus, and Ed's saying that this guy's great at what he does, that's good enough for me. So if you find me one rock star, you're going to find me 10 rock stars. If you find me one turkey, you're going to find me 10 turkeys. And that's the way it is. So that whole kind of, you know, cool friends, cool you, that's about like developing your peer circle. You had a slide in one of our other presentations talking about like, that in your network of, in your 10, was it your
Oh, it was
circle-
on that slide just a few minutes ago.
Here
The
it
middle
is.
slide.
This is it. Oh, subliminally. It's very interesting because I think that's a very true slide. Statistics show that your income is overwhelmingly likely to be 10% of the average of your 5 closest friends. Good.
Would that be weight?
Yeah, that should be weight. Weight is socially contagious. Sorry, bad cut and find and replace operation. Yeah, Harvard recently suggested that the same sort of statistical average holds around weight. That your weight is likely to be within 10% of the average of I think it was your 10 closest friends or something like that.
It's very interesting, but I call it guilt by association. But it's also like, and that's like what your network is. Your network is that, oh wait, Mike's friends with Adam O'Donnell. Okay, cool. Adam's a good guy, that type of deal. It's like,
It really works well that way, though. You meet one cool person, and if you become friends with them, next thing you know, you're friends with everyone. And that's how it was for me here last year at Source. You meet one cool person, next thing, you end up knowing everybody.
Well, that's because you get invited to the cool people parties.
Exactly.
but
And it works for hiring, too. I just had an interview last week, and the president told me what he likes to do is find one smart person and then raid their entire friend group.
yeah,
Smart president.
But there's an interesting scenario on that, right? Like, so one of my philosophies in recruiting is that it's always easy to recruit one. The first one's always easy. The second, third, and fourth is always difficult because there only can be one stellar opportunity. So you can always present one stellar opportunity, but the second, third, fourth, and fifth players are automatically going to be at some point a little bit later to the party. Do you know what I'm saying? So you have to think about that and then you also start about like dealing with social networks, right? So think about your social networks, right? I mean, how many people are your friends is the term on Facebook, right? I mean, or LinkedIn, right? I mean, how do you define who you accept invitations for, right? And then what kind of pictures are posted of you? I mean, that's a whole nother thing.
That's
but
a whole nother topic.
I mean, but you have to think about like all those types of interaction points where it's like, what is your network saying about you? I mean, you could have like one dirty bird, like you could have like one guy that like, I've had some weird stuff. I've had some, like my recruiters will talk to a number of people and they're very friendly, and they'll, invite people to their network and you'd be like, why are we networked with that person? And they'll be like, well, they were real nice to me and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, but they have a real horrible reputation and there's a lot of things. I said, look, check with me first, that type of stuff. And it's not so much to check with me on every person, but it's very scenarios that, if you lie down with bad dogs, you'll get fleas. I mean, and you have to think about that when you're building your network. Think, don't take everybody's opinion verbatim, but listen, everybody, a lot of people have opinions in this industry and stuff like that, but think about kind of that whole association and stuff like that. So, I mean,
Switching gears.
yeah, I mean, we could talk,
We could talk for hours about each of these topics.
But yeah, I mean, and we could, I think that we're basically out of time and stuff like that on this.
I want to go through a couple of things in the
Go ahead.
incident response section because I think with everything going on right now, there are a lot of people in that sort of, I need to get a job right now sort of thing. And the worst case scenario of anyone who goes through a career incident is to go into that 90-day, I call it the 90-day mope. Like you lose your job and you don't know what to do with yourself and you don't know what to do. And 90 days later, you're sitting around playing Xbox and eating donuts, eating Cheetos, exactly, and flipping channels all afternoon. And that's how you can certainly ensure that you're not going to get anything quickly and ensure that you're going to have the worst time of it possible. So, like I said, I'm going to go through this like lightning. If you have questions, you can ask about them afterwards. First step in dealing with a career incident is emotional response. Everyone has an emotional response to a job loss. Job loss is one of the 3 most stressful events in your life. Moving and loss of a loved one are the other 2. Divorce, death, either one. And actually, I'm going to write a paper or a blog about this at some point when I have a few extra minutes. But job loss is very much like a divorce. And so there are lots of books out there on breaking up. Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying talks about the grieving cycle. We go through all of the normal grieving cycle when we lose a job. You know, the first one is denial. Oh, it'll be okay. Everything's going to be fine. You know, it's just a job. Then you get angry. Then you just let me pay the bills this month and it'll be okay. Depression, and then finally acceptance. If you really want to do this well, set yourself a depression timeline. I like the rule of 12 years for every year that you had the job.
12 years?
Sorry, 12 hours. Yes, you're going to be grieving for a long time.
When I'm 90.
12 hours for every year you had the job. So if you had the job for 5 years, you get 2.5 days to sit around the house, mope, eat Cheetos, be depressed, cry, throw things, scream, the whole thing. And you give yourself a timeline. At the end of that time, you're done. No more of that kind of behavior. But everyone goes through it, so you have to accept it. The worst case scenario, and what usually causes the 90-day mope, is you get stuck here. You get stuck in everything's going to be fine, and then you just don't do anything because everything's going to be fine. You know, it'll all work out. That's sort of like the secret thing. If I manifest hard enough, another job will show up. Yeah, no, it won't. So.
The secret doesn't work.
But the secret of the secret is that if it didn't work, you didn't try hard enough. So that's why it's the secret. All right, and like I said, I'm running through this, but I want to get these slides done. Fundamentals are really important. In the first 72 hours, you're going to get presented with 1 billion pieces of paper. Sign this, sign that, COBRA paperwork, severance agreement, non-compete, invention assignment, all this stuff. Don't sign a damn thing until you've gone home and gone through that grieving process, because you are emotionally vulnerable. You're making decisions completely out of amygdala hijack and disappointment and depression and upset. If you sign anything, you will regret it. I lived through this. Lee can talk to the pain of it. At one point, I signed something that probably, I think the ultimate cost was about $25,000 because I didn't get proper legal advice on everything that I did. Luckily for me, I'm a good social engineer. I worked it out. I didn't pay them anything, actually, which was really quite nice. But the goal here is to make sure you're making these decisions in your right mind. Go home, get legal advice, ask as many questions as you need to. That's one of the big mistakes, and the mistake I made. You don't ask questions because you don't want to look dumb. That's how you end up looking dumb.
Yeah, it's very important. When this happens, I think that the most, this might kind of sound stupid if it ever happens to you, but just take a deep breath, keep your composure, don't do anything to make yourself look foolish, don't go postal or start yelling at people or get all emotional. It's emotional, and I hate to say it, but hold it in, swallow it, and just the sun will rise again and stuff like that. But when they will throw all this paperwork at you and say, well, we'll give you a severance if, or you can have your next 2 weeks pay if. Now at that time you have no other income. You think, wow, my whole income supply is off. 2 weeks of pay, I'll sign anything. You have to think about your upside, your downside. What am I really giving up? Is anything restricting me and stuff like that? Normally, when somebody's giving you a small sum of money for giving away a lot of your rights, you're traditionally on the wrong side of that equation. So you think about it. See an expert. And don't just call up your cousin and say, hey, you just graduated law school. Hey, here's my, go see a career person. Now, the different parts of where your career is might be different things. If you're a senior executive of a company, you need to spend a lot more time and money on this before you sign anything, because the deltas are probably bigger as well. But if you're a junior person, think about it. You at that point you might just consult a friend who's an attorney somewhere and stuff like that. But don't sign anything, because once it's in ink, it's in ink. But take a deep breath there.
Speaking of taking a deep breath, at that point it's time to get down to it. First step is to go back through your plan. You need to recalculate how much runway you have. This is the moment at which you need to know exactly how long you can live before you get kicked out of your house and you're eating.
You're moving back in with your parents.
Yeah, you're moving back in with your parents, exactly. At the same time, don't panic. No matter how bad it looks, nothing good happens when you're panicking. Take a deep breath, realize you have two different types of plan. If your runway is generally less than somewhere between 30 to 90 days, your goal is either to extend the runway by doing contract work or selling stuff on eBay or something to extend the runway, or to go into a very short-term type of job search. If you've got longer than that, you can take your time and do a more long-term search. And I'm going to quickly go through each of the short-term search, each of the type of job searches. Short-term search is generally not recommended. Nobody wants to be there. You would love to have lots of time to evaluate the companies that you want to work with. Anybody who's read the Forget the Parachute book that I did knows what I'm talking about. But if you need a job quickly and your parameters are sort of fuzzy, the goal is to line up as many opportunities as you can. Pick the best one. First step there is always reach out to your network. As Lee says, call in some favors. Somebody probably knows somebody who's hiring. That might be the right thing. The second one is to get your resume out there and get it in front of the right people at the right companies that have the right opportunities. Basically, your goal is to get as many people to hear of you and know that you're looking as possible in a short period of time. Try and get as many offers as you can that are really targeted and related to what you're currently doing. Talked earlier about the difference between a job that stretches you and a job that you're fit for today. This is where you're looking for a job that you're fit for today, and you're not as worried about what it's going to give you in 2 years, right? Because if you're moving back in with your parents after 30 days, this is probably better than that, no matter how bad the job is. That
You
said,
might have to take a short-term hit, and that'll be fine.
That said, you don't want to shoot yourself completely in the foot. You don't want to go.
But that's also a part where you might even think about, really trying to find some 1099 or contract work, where a lot of those jobs are very more skill-focused as opposed to career-focused. So that's where you can leverage a technical skill that you still are very sharp at, or something that you've become very good at, to pick up a 30-day contract, a 60-day contract, a 120-day contract, whatever it might be.
And those are all about extending runway.
Yes, and that just buys you time. That will buy you time, and that'll build some relationships, and you never know. But and normally 1099 work is very much job related, and W-2 work is more career related.
It buys you time to go into this kind of a process where you really consult your plan. You find someone that is, that ideal scenario Lee was talking about earlier. Someone who needs something that can also give you what you want. As far as your plan goes, then you go out and create the opportunities and actually close the deal, which closing the deal brings it back to resumes. Ultimately, your resume is a sales letter. It's a brochure for you, Inc. Most people don't think about it like that. It drives me nuts. I read resumes, and it's all about what they want. What's the first section on a traditional resume? Objective. What does the objective section say? It tells me all about what you want. I don't care what you want as a hiring manager. I don't really care that your objective is to be a goat farmer in Bolivia after you've made your money at a .com. I really care that you can solve my problem. Much like when you're buying a product and you read the brochure for the product, you don't really care what the company hopes to accomplish. You don't care what their quarterly targets are. You don't care what their goals are. You care if the product you're buying gives you what you need. If your resume doesn't tell the client what they need, your resume is not doing a good job. Your resume should ultimately be tailored so that the client reads it and it is going to tell them what they're going to get. That means your resume should be about your accomplishments. It's not about, oh look, I know C++. Well, Lee's the C++ guy, right?
Lee equals C.
Anyone can say they're a C++ person. Lee probably can't say, I wrote a 1,000 word program or 1,000-line program in C++. I'm making this example up on the fly, so it doesn't make much sense. But a 1,000-line program in C++ that does X, Y, and Z and uses the following third-party libraries and modules. That tells me a lot about what you can give me. Saying, I know C++ tells me not very much, right? Think about your resume when you're writing it as you were writing a sales brochure for a product.
When you put together your resume, right? You think about it. So, different people look for different things. One of the things that you have to do is do a little social engineering and figure out what's important to your audience, and then tell your resume that way. Like, one of the biggest mistakes I see people send to me, the first line is like, a senior leadership position as a information security officer. I'm like, dude, you gotta take that completely. I said, so the only jobs that you want are probably gonna be the jobs that the person who's gonna interview you already has. So like, that doesn't really work, So like, you have to think about it like, where is my marketability? Where is really my edge? And then that customer who's looking for something. And things do get, spilled out in job descriptions or in listening to the recruiters that you're dealing with and stuff like that and what they're dealing with. You really generally want to avoid working with people, putting your career in somebody's hand that really doesn't know much about like what you do and your skills and like what would make sense for you and stuff like that. You really want to put yourself in, around people, who can help you get and understand where you are, right? Like, so I think the concept is this, is that when you're pulling this resume together is that, understand almost at the least common denominator level about like where your skills will help that person do their job better, where that skill will help the company. I mean, I think that a really good, if you have to do an objective statement, you could do something very simple to say to utilize my skills as an information security professional to make the maximum impact on my employer. I mean, you could do something that's very simple to that if you feel that you have to have an objective statement. Nobody can say, well, we don't want people who are going to maximize their skills and make positive impacts and stuff like that. Understand who's probably reading your resume. An HR person's reading their resume and stuff like that. So think about, in a lot of cases, if you just start popping your things off to these internet sites and stuff like that, you might have to dress up that resume so Idiot 101 can figure that out. I mean, you really might have to do that. Because most HR people aren't going to understand the difference between, a web app security person or a software, a software security person or a network security person or somebody who understands policy and compliance versus somebody who understands information risk management. You're not going to see those types of things. So what you have to do is you have to think about, who's going to be, where's the gatekeeper? How do I get by the gatekeeper? How do I social engineer this process, basically?
We're just going to jump ahead into a couple of interview specifics. Lee probably should talk about the overqualified thing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say, well, you get, let go. And they say, well, you're overqualified for this position, right? So you have to try to avoid that. You have to try to like cut that off at the pass if that's possible. If you're interviewing, if you need a job and you're interviewing for something that you're kind of like, that you might not have considered if you weren't in a predicament and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think that those points in time where you really kind of like, you really start simplifying your knowledge. You start focusing on, the foundation of your skill set, the technical skills. Like, one of the worst things that people can say in an interview is, well, yeah, I used to be technical, or, yeah, no, I don't really do that anymore, or, I have other people in my team that do that work, Those are things that will get you killed in the job hunt and stuff like that. So you should really kind of start thinking about, where you came from, and that's why it's important to keep your skills sharp, to keep your industry knowledge sharp, to really stay on.
We're still live here.
Yeah, it was really great. I mean,
Yeah,
I
this
really
was a blast,
appreciate. I mean, it was a small, intimate setting for a long period of time. I really appreciate you guys all, staying and listening and, and interacting. I
Yeah,
mean,
hopefully
it was,
we were useful and you got something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
Did Twitter think so?
So.
Were people showing up on the screen in there? I thought that was awesome, by the way. I walked into that room and there's a live Twitter feed of all the hashtag Source Boston stuff. It's kind of cool.
The best thing was when I asked a question and then I walked into the room, looked up and realized there's ads that's really there that I hadn't noticed yet.
That's funny.
That was fun.
That's very funny. So who's not on Twitter here? Anyone? Steve, you're on Twitter, aren't you?
Yeah.
That's true of most of us. I don't have to ask you. You're on Twitter more than any of us.
He is Twitter.
That's true. That's true.
Nearly duplicated their database at this point.
Terrifying.
Yeah, you gotta tell me what that's all about. I've been hearing about that.
He's got all sorts of tools. Yeah, that's how we look at it and go and, hey, I'm most active when there's conferences going on. What was in April? Oh, that was RSA.
Funny. I can't believe you sat here the whole time and didn't say one word.
I was about to mention